Welcome to Car Sales Best Dual Cab for 2024. It remains one of Australia's most popular and hotly contested categories and will only get more so in years to come. In the next 12 months we'll see the new Kia Tasman, BYD Shark, JAC T9 and more. However, this year we're still dealing with the traditional nameplates. But which is best? Before we get into it, like the video, subscribe to the Car Sales channel and leave us a comment down below with your pick for the winner. Last time we tackled utes, we went for the mid-specs, but now we've gone high-end, as these variants are disproportionately popular with buyers. We're around the $75,000 price point, or as close as some models can get, but that does mean the likes of the GWM Cannon, SsangYong Musso and LD BT-50 missed out, as it wouldn't have been fair to use these vastly cheaper models, and the GWM Cannon Alpha sadly wasn't launched in time. Each ute was assessed on our 5 main criteria: safety, technology, comfort and convenience, ownership costs using data provided by our friends at Redbook, and driving performance, which in this case also incorporates towing and off-road. 7 utes were tested in total, but we're just going to cover the top 5 in detail, so here's what missed out and why. The Nissan Navara Pro 4X Warrior still drives really well, especially off-road, but it's showing its age in terms of its interior and features, while you'll cop a hit in resale too. If you want a really solid no-frills ute, investigate the Navara SL Warrior for 10 grand less. This next one might rustle some feathers. The HiLux GR Sport is a lot of fun and nigh on unstoppable off-road, but it's also severely limited in terms of payload when towing, very expensive to service, and others at this price point are well ahead in terms of features and on-road manners. It's not bad, but others are better. This brings us to the top 5, which I shall introduce in alphabetical order. The Ford Ranger is our reigning best dual cab champion, and this time we're using the Wildtrak 3-litre V6. It's packed with tech and features, but Ford does keep raising the price, so is it still competitive? Fresh off the boat at the time of testing was the facelifted Isuzu D-MAX X-Terrain. Its case strengthened by more tech, updated infotainment and improved off-road ability, with a sharp price to match. Next up is the D-MAX's twin, the heavily accessorised Mazda BT-50 Thunder. It doesn't receive the Isuzu's new upgrades, but counters with extra kit. Our first all-new contender is the Mitsubishi Triton GSR. Well, actually what you see here is an optioned up GLS, but we used a GSR for testing. It retains a decent price advantage over most of the others here, and now has more power, more space and much greater load carrying capabilities. Our second all-new entrant is the Volkswagen Amarok Panamericana. Well, sort of. Everyone knows it's closely related to the Ford Ranger, but Volkswagen does put its own spin on things, particularly on the inside. So is this enough to give it the advantage? I'll run you through each car's cabin from front to rear, take them for a drive on and off-road, while also detailing running costs, safety and equipment levels, so use the timecodes below if you want to skip ahead. But let's start with the Ranger. When it debuted, the Ranger set a new benchmark for dual cab interiors, and it still stacks up pretty well a couple of years on. This Wildtrak scores nicer materials, there's heaps of cubby holes and well laid out storage. We've got dual glove boxes, this little dash shelf, in-dash cup holders which are handy. There's just lots of space for stuff you need every day. The front seats are heated and power adjustable. The only real disappointment is the fact that you can't get the full width digital instruments from the Raptor or Platinum, not even as an option. For such a high spec ute, it does feel like a bit of a missed opportunity. The huge portrait touchscreen includes wireless smartphone mirroring, app connectivity, lots of features, though a recent update means some of the menus have changed slightly, and I'm not sure it's as intuitive as it was. To the D-MAX, and we have another practical cabin. Twin glove boxes again, in-dash cup holders, plenty of hard keys so functions are easy to find and adjust, good driving position. Some of the materials aren't what you'd call premium, but then again the D-MAX doesn't have the price tag of some of the other utes here either. New to the D-MAX is this upgraded infotainment system with more features, physical volume and tuning knobs, and there's wireless Android Auto and charging, as well as wireless CarPlay now. There's also a much larger digital screen in the instruments, which now incorporates the speedo. The Mazda BT-50 hasn't scored the same upgrades as the new D-MAX, so while you have most of the same convenience and storage features, you don't have the in-dash cup holders or the dash top cubby here, but you do get some extra leather. You still got the old infotainment and analog dials. Mazda knows this, however, so it's now offering a locally developed 11-inch infotainment system with wireless smartphone mirroring, dual USB-C inputs and off-road navigation, as well as the option of better speakers. It can also be retrofitted, but you'll need around $5,000 for the complete kit. The new Triton is a big step up over its predecessor, as you'd hope, and despite the lower price tag, you don't really miss out on too much in here, at least in the flagship GSR. Now this is an optioned up GLS, not a GSR, as Mitsubishi couldn't supply one for filming, but either way we've got the heated electric seats, which are very comfy, standard in the GSR, optional in the GLS. GSR also has the in-dash cup holders, which I keep mentioning because they're really handy to just have your drink right here, but they're missing here. Either way, we've got plenty of storage, dual glove boxes, really simple HVAC controls, great steering wheel. Might sound strange, but it really does make a difference. It's a great mix of traditional and modern in here. The infotainment screen isn't the biggest, but there's wireless smartphone mirroring and it's easy enough to navigate. And while the Triton doesn't have a digital dash, if you're like me, you won't really mind, as the analog gauges look good and work very well. So the main difference between the Volkswagen Amarok and the Ford Ranger on which it's based is that Volkswagen went to a concerted effort to jazz up the interior, and it's done so pretty successfully. The materials are better, leather dash, lovely leather steering wheel, full width digital instruments. I said I'm not that worried about their exclusion in the Triton, but if you're going to do it and charge almost $80,000 before on-roads, do it properly like this. Better seats, which are 10-way adjustable as well as heated. The Ranger does have more storage for just odds and ends, but then the Amarok's got this dash top area, so let's call it a dead heat. The Amarok uses the same large portrait infotainment screen as the Ranger, and you can pretty much toss a coin in terms of functionality. The VW has full screen Apple CarPlay, though we do wish it had kept the physical HVAC controls of the Ranger. Bigger isn't necessarily better, but the Ranger and the Amarok do stand out as the benchmark for their tech offerings in terms of features, though all the utes here will cover the basic needs of most people pretty well. None of these utes are exactly luxurious in the back, and to be blunt, if you're primarily carrying the kids, you're much better off with an SUV. That said, the Ranger isn't too bad here in terms of space, especially with these cutouts in the front seats. We've got dual air vents, USB-C and A outlet, Isofix on each side, and if you need to hide something valuable, there's a secret cubby hole underneath the bench. In the D-MAX, the back seat's pretty good. It's got a bit of contour to it, and there's now a USB-C outlet instead of an A, as well as the dual rear air vents. We've got a little bag hook here, which is quite handy. Fold down center armrest with 2 cup holders, and speaking of folding, you can either fold the backrest down or 60-40 split the bench up for more storage, and there's another cubby hole under here as well. Unsurprisingly, bar the brown leather, the BT-50 is exactly the same as the D-MAX in the back, except it still retains the USB-A outlet, not the USB-C. One of the biggest changes to the new Triton is a fairly substantial wheelbase stretch, which means an equally sizable increase in rear legroom. It's now plenty spacious in here. We've got the same fold down center armrest with cup holders as the others, USB-A, C and 12-volt outlets. Air vents are in the roof, which is a bit different, but it works fine. Controls are up here. One difference is Mitsubishi has decided to use a single top tether point. The Navara has something kind of similar, and while I can see the logic in it, in reality it makes it more difficult to fit the kids' seats as securely as you'd like. Like the front, Volkswagen has gone to an effort to spruce up the back of the Amarok with some success. The bench has more padding and more sculpting. There are these little pockets on the back of the front seats for putting stuff. But otherwise, it's pretty much as per the Ranger in terms of space, dual air vents, but no USB outlets, which seems a bit mean. In terms of safety, the Ranger and Amarok are the benchmark, with not only the most airbags and every possible active safety inclusion, which are also very well tuned, but luxuries like self-park and a 360-degree camera. The Isuzu, Mazda and Mitsubishi are certainly not lacking, especially in terms of the primary safety equipment. The calibration of their active systems could use work. But more on that when we get behind the wheel. All our utes have pretty decent trays, but there are some key differences. The Ranger actually has the shortest tray in terms of length, reduced further by the powered roller tonneau, but there are plenty of features. We've got a 12-volt outlet, LED lighting, this rail system for the top tie-down points, side steps, and inbuilt clamp points. Ford spent a lot of time and effort trying to make the Ranger as useful as possible. The D-MAX also has that handy but space-robbing tonneau, though in this case it's manual. And while it's 100mm longer than the Ranger, it's also 100mm narrower between the wheel arches, which may or may not matter depending on what you're trying to carry. Only 2 tie-down points, but damp tailgate, which is nice. Now, you might think the BT-50 is exactly the same as the D-MAX, but this being the Thunder, there is a powered roller tonneau and lighting, but still only 2 tie-down points and no tailgate dampening. In terms of dimensions, they are identical. Well, actually, Mazda claims the BT-50 is 1mm longer. The new Triton has a bigger tray and it's now very competitive. And while the GLS doesn't have a tub liner as standard, the GSR does, so it would be as you see it here. It does lack a few features, but then it is less money than the Wild Track and the Thunder, etc. But no 12-volt, no lighting, no tonneau, but 4 tie-down points, so it's got the basics. So the Amarok is the same as the Ranger, right? Not quite. VW has carved out a little extra length by sculpting that rear wall, and there is this nice spray-in bed liner, as well as 6 tie-down points and LED lighting, but there's no 12-volt, no tonneau as standard, and it misses out on the little features like the side steps and inbuilt clamp points. When it comes to payload, the Triton is now king. But the Ranger and Amarok are also very strong, even when towing at maximum capacity. The D-MAX and BT-50 are pretty good when unladen, but their lower GCMs mean if you're towing heavy, you'll have to be careful how much you load into the tray or cabin. Speaking of towing, it's the Ranger that impresses most thanks to its stability, control, performance, impressive safety systems, and clever and useful aids like the inbuilt light check and Pro Trailer Backup Assist. Now we're into the rough stuff, and in a sense, the verdict on all these utes is kind of the same, as they're hamstrung by the same 2 things to varying degrees: tyres and ground clearance. If you're really serious about this stuff, you're going to want to modify these utes further, but in standard guise, we'll test them out, and there's a section of our favourite off-road park that is a really good challenge. It tests wheel articulation, clearance, and in particular, traction, both mechanical and electronic. So we'll go through each ute and try them basically in 4 high and 4 low, again starting in the Ranger. Now the Ranger actually has 4A, so that is center diff unlocked. So we'll be just relying basically on the traction control. So let's try that, see how it goes, and then we can go from there. So this is just 4A, ease into it, lifting a wheel, traction control's on, making progress, bit of a clunk there, but that's really quite impressive, but now we've come to a grinding halt. So let me just reverse back. So the next thing to do would be to try mud and ruts mode. So this then sets up the car for me basically. So now I've got 4 high, diff locked, traction control off. Let's see how we go. And already much easier. Absolutely. Oh, this bit's a bit tricky though. But there we go, we got out of it. Dug its way out. Had to have a think about it, but the electronic brain figured out where the power needed to go, and off we went. Clearance is probably the biggest problem for the Ranger though. This Wild Track has okay all-terrain tyres. They're not just your typical highway spec tyres, so that's okay, but really struggles with clearance, especially with these side steps. We heard it grind out a couple of times. Okay, now for the final run, I'll just do 4 low. So, diff still locked. So let's see how we go now. This is basically the ultimate off-road mode. 4 low, diff locked, and piece of cake. We're lifting wheels here, but there we go. Even with low range and the diff locked, traction control still operates. So while I got sort of stuck there, didn't just send all the power to an unladen wheel, and it managed to crawl itself out. So that's a pretty impressive benchmark. Let's see how the other utes go. Into the D-MAX now, and one seemingly quite insignificant change has had a major influence on this thing's capability off-road, but I'll get to that in a moment. Let's try it in just regular 4H, traction control on. Let's see what happens. We've got the parking sensors going off. There we go. Are we making progress? We are. Now, can the traction control figure it out? Yes, it can. There we go. That wasn't particularly pretty, but we made it. No graunching on the side steps. Better ground clearance than the Ranger. Right, so it was pretty heavy going in 4 high, but we got there in the end. Now for 4 low. So previously in the D-MAX, selecting 4 low would disengage the traction control on the front axle. So if you lifted the wheel, all the power would get spun away and you'd basically go nowhere. Now we can select 4 low, and as standard it does the same thing. All the electronic aids are off, but I just press this rough road button, and now I've got the assistance of traction control and the rear diff locked, but in 4 low. And we make much better progress. But we don't have the tyres. There we go, let's try this again. Here we go. There we go, just need a little bit more momentum to get up. But equally, that traction control was hugely important in making that final bit of the climb. Before, we would have been absolutely nowhere. All the power spinning away on one wheel. So just a small change, bit of software really, but it's made a huge difference to the capability of the new D-MAX off-road. The advantages of the D-MAX's upgrade should hopefully be brought into stark relief by the BT-50, which is essentially the old D-MAX. So I'm going to look pretty silly if this thing just walks up no problem. But let's start it in 4 high and see how we go. Now this should be similar to the D-MAX, because in 4 high we didn't have the rough road mode. There we go, what have we got? Yeah, traction control's figuring itself out. Steady throttle. Now the other wheel's up. Now it's figuring itself out. Can it get over the hump? Yes! There we go. Again, very similar to the D-MAX. Took its time to figure out what was going on and where the power was needed, but kudos, it did it. Got up to the top, no problem. And again, no scraping, so that's good. Bit more ground clearance. Okay, so let's try that again. We're now in low range. Low range actually engages really quickly in both the BT-50 and the D-MAX, so that's good. Diff lock on, but I've got no traction control assistance. So let's see how we go. Maybe the rear locker will be enough. Gets through the first bit okay. Now, can it make it? No. See, we're going nowhere. We're going absolutely nowhere. Try with a little bit more momentum and see if we can make it happen. No, as soon as that rear wheel is off the ground, we've got absolutely nothing. Bit of momentum. There we go, a little bit more right pedal. Made it happen, but it shows the effectiveness of that new system in the D-MAX. We could just crawl up there, steady throttle. To be fair, they still made it, but Needed a bit more right foot action. One of Mitsubishi's USPs has always been its Super Select all-wheel drive system, which means that you can run in four-wheel drive on sealed surfaces. Obviously the V6 Amarok and Ranger now have that system, so it's not quite as unique as it once was, but still, pretty good feature. And let's just try in that 4 high, center diff unlocked, just traction control, and we'll see how we go. Let's try that again. Nah, see, traction control is just taking away all the power. I'll try that once more, just with a little bit more momentum. But as soon as it felt wheel slip, it's basically geared for on-road driving, and it's just taking away all the power. There we go. Okay, so that one's no good. We'll put it in 4 high. So now this is the lock diff. Ease into it, parking sensor's going crazy. Again, I've got my foot like welded to the firewall. It's going absolutely nowhere. So that's no good either. But you get different drive modes in the Triton depending on which of the all-wheel drive selections you've made. So in 4 auto, you get, sand and snow, I think. But now I can choose from mud. And I'll put it in mud mode and see if that makes a difference. It should, hopefully, adjust the traction control to give me a bit more wheel slip and get me through. There we go, much better. We've already gotten much further than we did before. Can we get over this final hump? This is a tricky one. Come on. Yep, there we go, we did it. There we go. It's easy to scoff at those drive modes, right? Yeah, whatever. But perfect example. 4 high regular, wasn't going anywhere. Just took away all the power no matter what I did. As soon as I selected that mud mode, it allowed enough wheel slip, eventually, once it figured itself out, to scramble up and get where we needed to go. Okay, so for the last run, I'll just chuck it in 4 low. Very good, much quicker engagement in this than the previous Triton as well. That was instant. The old Triton could have to go back and forth to try and get it to engage. Stick the rear diff lock on. Let's see how we go. Again, just ease into it. Piece of cake. Even as we're lifting wheels, still making good progress. This is the really tricky bit, but that is super impressive. That is really, really impressive. That just absolutely walked up. And even that last bit where the others have sort of gotten a bit hung up, especially the D-MAX and the BT-50, this just cruised up. Very, very impressive. Mitsubishi. No scraping either. So decent clearance as well. So last but not least, we have the Amarok Panamericana. And this is kind of the off-road version of the Amarok, in that it at least has all-terrain tyres, very similar to the Ranger. They're not super aggressive, but certainly better than highway tyres. That aside, it should perform identically. They've got the same ground clearance, same drive modes. Amarok's a little bit better on departure angle, but not much in it. So we'll start in 4 auto with just traction control working. No center diff locked. Will it scrape like the Ranger? There we go. I mean, that's so good compared to, say, the Mitsubishi that just stopped in its tracks. This just has a moment to think about it. Can we climb up this last bit? Yes, we can. It had to think about it, and we scraped that side step again. So for some reason, maybe it's the longer wheelbase. This thing can't get over that last hump, Ranger or Amarok, without knocking a side step. I reckon it is probably the longer wheelbase, but that aside, the traction control system's so impressive. So we're just in the regular driving, everyday driving mode, and whereas the Triton just came to a halt, this clambered up nicely. So given it got up in 4 auto, selecting 4 high, locking that center diff, should mean we have little trouble. But, I mean, the track is getting slightly more churned up as we go through it more and more times, but can it get up this last bit? It's climbing. We got there in the end. It's amazing how you can always sense the car figuring things out. Just holds it, and then starts to gather momentum. Very, very clever. And now for the final one off-road, let's stick all the bells and whistles on. So, 4 low. Again, the shift in the Amarok and Ranger, very, very quick. Diff lock. There's one good thing about the Amarok is that while we sort of talk about the lack of physical buttons for the infotainment, you don't have to go digging in the menu for the rear diff lock like you do in the Ranger. Button right there. So anyway, 4 low, diff lock on. This should be a walk in the park. Up we go. Look at that. Absolute piece of cake. Now, I did mention it briefly at the start of the video, but it's worth noting that the 2 cars that aren't here, they sort of didn't make the final cut, the Nissan Navara Warrior and the Toyota HiLux GR Sport in particular, they were absolutely awesome during testing here. They didn't make the final 5 for other reasons, but man, if you want to go off-road, those things are unbelievable. Still, as I mentioned, all these things are pretty good, but the Amarok and the Ranger really do have the smarts in this rough terrain. When it comes to cost of ownership, the Triton is tough to beat with its low purchase price, strong residuals, excellent fuel efficiency, and that 10-year warranty if you service at Mitsubishi dealers. The D-MAX is also very strong thanks to Isuzu's strange but welcome move to have drive-away pricing on the X-Terrain along with another strong warranty. Then again, the Ranger and Amarok have cheaper prepaid servicing options, and the Ford's benchmark residual values really do look after you when it comes time to sell. Okay, now it's business time. I'm going to run you briefly through what each ute is like to drive on road, but I'm going to do so in the order they finished this test. So first up we have the Mazda BT-50 Thunder. Not a bad ute at all, but it probably shouldn't be surprising that it finishes behind the new Amarok, new Triton, very strong Ranger, and facelifted version of the D-MAX that it's based on. You're probably familiar with how the BT-50 drives from other reviews, so I'll keep this short. Strong if noisy engine, more than adequate dynamics as far as dual cabs go. This is still very much a working ute, but it's not at all difficult or taxing to drive. The Thunder wouldn't be where we'd put our money though. For around 75 grand plus on-roads, or 80 if you spec that new infotainment, there are just better options around. All those Thunder add-ons add quite a lot of weight, which hurts performance, economy, payload, and it struggles to contain the extra mass both on and off-road. Simply put, if you want a BT-50, grab a GT and save yourself a heap of coin. Next up, the Mitsubishi Triton, and there's a lot that's great about it. Better cabin, more space, good fuel economy, improved towing, great payload, but ultimately it's a disappointment because it's so close to being really, really good. You've probably heard about the driver monitoring system, which will drive you up the wall. But even if you're happy to turn it off each time you drive the car, and to be fair, it does learn and get better over time, the suspension needs an overhaul. On our drive loop, on both tarmac and gravel, bumps that the others just shrugged off and ignored had the Triton lurching and heaving. Just doesn't have the control that you'd like. The steering's good, but it just asks questions that the rest of the car struggles to answer. And that's the frustration. Fix that one thing and you'd have a really solid offering, but as it stands, 4th it is. Now for the D-MAX, and Isuzu's done a great job of identifying some flaws in its ute and rectifying them with this latest update. To drive, it's the same as before. Easy enough to make long journeys, no problem, without the refinement and polish of the 2 utes ahead of it. You've probably figured out by now what those might be. Nevertheless, it's better off-road, a bit nicer inside, more tech, strong warranty, though no doubt Isuzu's sharp driveway pricing for its flagship helps its case. It won't come as a shock to learn the Ranger Rock pairing are 1 and 2, but in which order is the question. Yes, the VW Amarok is second, but it's also a bit more complicated than that. See, in total scoring across 3 judges, so out of 300, 2 points separated the Ranger and Amarok. 2. That's less than 1%. So while in the variants tested, the Amarok Panamericana comes second by a whisker to the Ranger Wildtrak, honestly, across the respective Rangers, it's so tit for tat that it's like a boxing match which goes back and forth round by round with no one landing the knockout punch. The main reason you'd buy an Amarok over a Ranger is the interior, which we've covered. As far as dual cabs go, it's about as swish as you can get. Another possible reason is that VW has its own suspension setup, especially in the Panamericana and Aventura variants, which use a different monotube damper. It's a bit firmer, a bit sharper, and compared to, say, the Triton, body control is in a different league. VW says its customers want a more dynamic drive, and it may well be right, but the advantage is somewhat nullified in the Panamericana, on road at least, due to the all-terrain tyres. The Aventura, with its 21-inch rims and road tyres, uses it to better effect. So why did the Amarok Panamericana finish second, albeit by a fraction? Well, it's tiny margins really. The Ranger's just a little bit cheaper, even when fully optioned, has that standard roller tonneau. The interior's not as nice, but is a little more practical, better residual value. We're talking 1%ers, but we had to split them somehow. That said, if you want an Amarok, go for it. It's great. Yep, Ford Ranger wins again. And this shouldn't come as a huge surprise, as Ford spent an enormous amount of resource, time, money, and people trying to reset what a dual cab could be. Let's deal with the downsides first. The Amarok shows there's room for improvement in terms of cabin materials. The Triton has a bit more payload now. The V6 diesel isn't the most frugal option. And the main thing is that the price has increased by around $4,000 since it launched a couple of years ago. That aside, this still sets the benchmark in so many areas. The ride handling balance, the refinement, the safety and tech, all those neat little features around the tray and the towing and the interior, just shows how much thought went into the creation of this thing. The other advantage of the Ranger is that if the price of the V6 is an issue, you can get the 4-cylinder Wildtrak with all the same toys and capability and save yourself $4,000. It's not quite as refined or as grunty, it's not far off either. This is still as good as dual cabs get. The question now is whether any of those wave of newcomers will be good enough to challenge the Ford Ranger, or indeed any of the established nameplates you've seen in this test. We'll find out in 2025, but for now, the Ford Ranger continues its reign as car sales' best dual cab. Thanks for watching.